Gather round, dads, it's time for a tale. Hand me a book and a warm pint of ale. Let's discuss writing and the literary gods with Dan Roberts on the Dadlit Pod.
Welcome to the Dadlit Pod, the literary podcast for people who just discovered my face, or is it Twitbook? That's just a joke. The Dadlit Pod is on Twitter at the Dadlit Pod. Tonight, I'm joined by Richard Leise. Leise, correct?
Yep.
Richard teaches outside Ithaca, New York. He was a Perry Morgan Fellow from Old Dominion University's MFA program and the recipient of the David Scott Sutellen Memorial Scholarship. His debut novel, Being Dead, was published fall 2023 and is available where books are sold. His short story, Of Ducks, was selected for 2025's Best Microfiction Anthology. And his novels, Dry the Rain and Dying Man in Living Room, are forthcoming from Picketfire Press and ELJ editions, respectively. And he is a 3-year Teacher of the Year recipient. You can find him on Twitter at Coy_Harlingen. Richard, welcome to the Dadlit Pod.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I've been wanting to get you on ever since I heard that John picked your manuscript for Picketfire's sophomore release.
Yeah, John's a great guy and a fantastic writer and editor.
Yes, and that is the book I read, Where When It Rains. Tell the dad literati what Where When It Rains is about.
It's a great question. So the novel opens up with main character Prague, who had suffered a head injury, and
Sorry, not Where When It Rains. I'm having a stroke.
That's okay.
Dry the Rain. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's a bit of an overlap. I don't mind talking about John's book.
I'm sorry.
I had that for an hour.
Yes, every book from Picketfire from here on out is going to have rain in it, I guess.
Yeah.
No. Rich is the author of Dry the Rain, which is a book that is about a very complicated topic that seems to come up in the news a lot lately, and is treated with an element of salaciousness, which is the kidnapping and exploitation of children, similar to, for example, the movie The Room with Brie Larson, or other books like that. And I've read Dry the Rain, and Dry the Rain is a very interesting book in that it is told as a sort of recounting of the experience of the girl post the kidnapping and being held prisoner. And it's written as not only a testimonial of the experience of being held hostage, but also as a testimonial of being pursued and having to sell her story to people who would otherwise use it without her consultation or approval or involvement, with the threat that things would become rather salacious. I think in that way, it is almost described, I would describe it as a young woman trying to correct the record and knowing that people won't understand her, but that she wishes to be understood. And that is an interesting story for you to write, Richard, just purely because you were not in that headspace or have not been a young girl at any point, to the best of my knowledge.
That's correct.
So, what inspired you to sit down and write a book about a topic that I think is, aside from being a tragic reality that we all did not realize was going on, but also about the underlying idea of the exploitation after the fact of these young people?
Yeah, thank you. If I could narrow down sort of the genesis of the idea for writing the book, or the germ of the idea, um, and I want to avoid sweeping generalizations, so I'll try to internalize and make this as personal as possible, because don't want to be judgmental. But I was in a situation wherein one of those sort of programs was on, and this was a good 4 or 5 years ago, and people were beginning to stream much more regularly,
Mhm.
as opposed to just sitting down and putting on a program. And there was one of those shows on, a Dateline or a 2020, and the person that I was with was watching one of these accounts, and after about 10 or 15 minutes got bored with it and selected a different one.
Mhm.
And about 5 or 10 minutes later, wasn't that captivated by that narrative, and switched to one, until ultimately they found one that they wanted to watch all of the way through. And it struck me as sort of horrific, the idea of using other people's tragedies not just as like bedtime pastimes, but to then not have the attention span to sit and watch the entire ordeal, because what you're watching you just don't find entertaining, and you want to find a more interesting and salacious story that fits whatever mood you're in at the time. So sitting back and reflecting upon that, the idea for the story began to take shape.
Mhm. And there are elements of it that I find very interesting that sort of speak to other instances where there's a real stream of critique about the utilization of media to tell these stories and the rather abrupt inclusion of commerce, right? This idea that elements of a person's story, not only if they're being exploited, and even if they participate in it, they can't guarantee that their action within the story will make it through. And you use very specifically the young girl's Catholic faith as an example, that in working through the result of her experience, she came to become very, very strongly enmeshed and supported by Catholic faith. And I, this hit me very um, interesting because there's another instance there. I want to say Lauren Hildebrand, who wrote Unbreakable, which was a book about a downed airman who was tortured in a Japanese POW camp and then subsequently became an alcoholic and was then saved by a famous, I think it was Billy Graham, and ceased his alcohol use. Angelina Jolie subsequently made that into a movie, but doesn't feature the later stages of the man's life where he finds the way out of the hole, right? So effectively the torment and the experience he experiences in the Japanese POW camp, he takes home with him and struggles with until finding a way out of it. In this case, it was would you call it evangelical Christianity or sort of well, anyway,
Yeah,
through
I
yeah,
don't
it's
know the narrative. I mean, I know the narrative. I haven't read it, but if it comes through Billy Graham, it's primarily evangelical
yeah, it's
Christian.
evangelical
Where
Christianity. And I thought it was really strange that the movie just ends with him getting out of the camp. And I'm like, that's not how the book ends. There's a lot more. Uh it doesn't sort of it doesn't end with being pulled out of the place. There's another element of it. And as you point out in the book, the producers are rather uninterested in how one lives with uh, the experience from day to day. They're far more interested with the experience, which is uh, sort of instigates what you have the young woman's voice respond to and why she thinks it's so important. I think that's really interesting. Is that just generally your view of how you've seen these things play out, or what inspired that?
yeah, you're pretty much spot on. So as I began writing, I continued to watch primarily people watching the programs, and I noticed that there's a very specific pattern that the programs employ, sort of a voiceover narrator. Um, if I can backtrack a tiny bit, what the producers slash writers of the show do is they turn it into like a Matlock or a Perry Mason. Everybody
Hmm.
knows the outcome, but they craft an episode so that it becomes a whodunit and you can sort of figure it out. And there's a reveal at the end. There's some tremendous examples of this that are streaming currently. And the pattern that I noticed is that they had a tendency to just share with the viewer one picture or
Hmm.
maybe two pictures of the individual and or the captor. And basically everything was reduced to the version of the story that they thought would appeal to somebody, so that unlike the individuals I witnessed, they wouldn't click and get to a different, more interesting episode. They would stick with the narrative, the crazy sort of story, the events that occurred, with very little regard to the people that were affected. So I want to make sure it comes clear I have so much respect for anybody that went through something like that, that came out the other side. I have no idea who or why certain decisions were made and were placed in their particular hands. So it's not an indictment of individuals who participate in those programs. It's much more a reflection upon the viewership. What is it that they're actively seeking?
Hmm.
You mentioned the word commerce. Again, yeah, turning these tragedies into specific mini narratives that, again, leave out some of, at least in my um, imagination, some of the more interesting aspects, such as the example you gave, which is, again, all right, so it just ends. No, they continue living. Now, our protagonist, Mallory, quote unquote, the name that the producers give her, um, her interests are a little bit more different, in that she's basically given an ultimatum. The rights have already been sold. She has no choice. It's going to
Hmm.
be aired, so it's either participate and have some sort of creative control, or just watch what unfolds. And the narrative is about her decision to become involved, and through that process, she haphazardly um, corrects what she thinks needs to be corrected and says what she thinks needs to be said.
Mhm. I had an interesting experience, and this sort of brings it up. I went to see the musical Parade last weekend with my wife, and Parade is about the Leo Frank trial and subsequent lynching. And I went to see it, and I was sort of puzzled by it. I was puzzled by it mostly because it was written originally in the 1990s. So it has a very 1990s stylistic Broadway flair to it. But beyond that, I just felt weird watching it play out within the perspective of sort of communal entertainment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought it was very odd. At the same time, I knew all the people in it were quite committed to the story and to telling the story and to tackling the misnomers and the misinformation and the dishonesty around what was effectively the murder of a 13-year-old girl in the form Molly Fagan, but also the subsequent lynching of Leo Frank after his sentence had been commuted by the governor. And I watched it and I thought it was very weird to make uh, because a significant portion of the play revolves around Frank's relationship with his wife, who she was very in love with him, and they came from two different places, and would subsequently be she would never marry again. At the same time, thinking of your book, right? So I thought this was very strange to focus on this element of his life. At the same time, as your book shows, that they're not all of one's existence is the horror. There are other things that you experience throughout that, and I think it's just an interesting question for people who tackle a subject matter that's about what is effectively human tragedy. So this struck me about your book is that in tackling it, you explore other elements because, of course, this person was alive and they experienced life, or this character was alive and experienced life while under this very trying circumstance, and what that might have looked like, or what it would have ensued. So, needless to say, the your book is very interesting, and I enjoyed it. Uh, I think um, it's different than books that I would usually read. I'll say that. It wouldn't occur to me to read it, but I'm glad I did.
Well, I'm glad that you did, and I appreciate the commentary and any parallels to works that are, you know, superior to mine on Broadway, etc.
Well, I'm not suggesting superior.
No,
No,
I
it's
I
just
definitely am. The
it's 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 just an interesting thing to it. I mean, think about, for example, tackling books that tackle school shootings. Um, it's challenging, I think, to create any art about a tragedy and to do so with a genuineness and avoid it feeling trite, which you've obviously pulled off with this book, because it's a very moving portrayal and a very interesting portrayal. It
Yeah, a lot
just,
of the impetus behind it was even like what we're doing now in the more so than what's on television is the explosion. And I'm not going to mention any of the casts by name, but that focus on, like, say, serial killers
mhm,
and who's your favorite serial killer. And the idea that you can get serial killers as Halloween costumes. These are all things that when Mallory is abducted, she's got no awareness of. And when she comes out, she's sort of dumbfounded by the fact that not only is there a podcast, but there's a podcast that's put on by two comedians, let's just say, who do deep dives into research, and a huge component of their programming is making the content funny. And it's not in a way because they need to sort of disarm the audience. That's part of the appeal. It's a funny podcast about somebody who has done the things that are mentioned or alluded to in Dry the Rain, and then packaged to an audience, and now they go on tour. And we have moved from what was the classic NPR My American Life.
This American Life.
This American Life. We moved from that into a handful of these podcasts, because I don't want to diss anybody, that now, like, we've moved from there to here, and it's such a seismic shift. And I'm not going to make a judgment. The book was written so that I hope people start to consider what they consume and what it means.
I'll just say the one of the biggest players is in the podcast sphere is a former producer from This American Life, who went on to start one of those podcast companies. I think that
There's money there.
What'd you say?
There's money there.
Yeah, there's money there, to say the least. Do you think that you can have podcasting or entertainment advocacy, that entertainment advocacy can exist?
Could you explain that question a little bit more?
Well, I think, for example, for example, John Krakauer, who wrote Under the Banner of Heaven, where Krakauer takes this rather salacious case of a murder spree and the murder of a woman and her child by her brother-in-laws, and uses it as a way to talk about emerging religious extremism, and how religious extremism can incite people, but beyond incite people, imbue them with a sense of righteousness in action that is and can be catastrophic. And to that extent, he's basically writing, I suppose, a journalistic work, but it's a journalistic work about a thing that happened in 1986, and he wrote it in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And so I wonder if what does that line look like between sort of advocacy, journalism, and exploitation? And are there hard and fast rules? And can you even tell at this point, or can one even tell?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think, and thanks for grounding that. Absolutely. I think only the individual, let's say in this case, podcaster, can answer that. Like, if your aim is true, then absolutely 100%. And I think as a consumer, again, just speaking only for myself, I have a visceral reaction to what I'm listening to. And if what I'm listening to is informative, enlightening, much more journalistic, and it seems like the intent behind that is to convey information so that X, Y, or Z won't happen again, or I want to educate a public upon X, Y, or Z, then totally. But so much of it really, I think, can only come down to the individual on both sides of the screen, as this case may be, what their particular intent is, and then what role are you as a consumer. I keep going back to the idea of a program, again, about something horrific happening to somebody, and you're just not finding it interesting enough, so you change it to a very similar episode, but one that you find more compelling. To take it one step further, for me, like the line becomes a little bit crossed when the focus becomes much more about the casters as celebrities
Hmm.
and merchandise, as opposed to the families affected by the tragedies, if they're even really referenced at all. At most, a lot of
Yeah.
what I've seen now just distills down to the minds and the pathologies of the killers, with no regard at all whatsoever to those whose lives they've either ended and the family members who they've changed permanently. So for me, it's
Yeah.
just a gut visceral reaction. I don't think there's a clear demarcation, but I can certainly tell you what I like and what I don't like.
Yeah. I I, I ask it because there are topics that I'd like to one day write nonfiction books about that are related to contemporary tragedies, specifically the serial killers in Jersey City who were responsible for killing an Uber driver, a police officer, and then shooting up a kosher grocery store. Uh, and I feel like it's so crucially important not to sort of fetishize uh, people who do things like this, and yet we see it, right? Almost recently seen it within the past week with this sort of salacious elements, and I just wonder what if there is almost a guideline beyond our own taste or our own reaction to making that call. But of course, your book explores that, which is one of the reasons why it's very interesting.
Yeah, so it was an exploration in mentioning Unbroken. That was actually part of New York State's curriculum when they went to the Common Core for that period of time. Another story.
Oh,
But
really?
if, yeah, um, required reading for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
I was down south at the time. But sort of one way that I would personally attack it, especially since you mentioned the word advocacy, I don't quite consider Dry the Rain um, in that
Oh,
particular
no,
vein.
no, I don't think so either.
But
Yeah.
to connect those sort of dots, I would look to more like Bob Dylan's Hurricane, if you're
Hmm.
familiar with the song, where he again goes through this incredible historical event, turns it into a narrative that you can read or that you can listen to. The
Hmm.
music, which plays a huge role in Dry the Rain, sets the tone and the mood. Um, Dylan doesn't hold back with regards to any of his diction or language choice.
Hmm.
And he tells the story of an injustice, excuse me, um, very much what seems akin to like what you're interested in pursuing. And those individuals are who I turn to for of guidance. And throughout the editing process, I mean, that was a huge part of this with not just Picketfire John, but other industry professionals who worked with me in regards to like, toning Mallory's voice down, um, working not to offend the reader, but then inviting the reader to be offended. There's so many elements at play that I just found more and more interesting as I wrote and rewrote the narrative to where it is now.
Yeah. So, and I'll go back to this play, for example. It's very clear that they were very conscious of putting on a play. To the point where during the intermission, the actor who plays Leo Frank, who is at this point in the history in prison awaiting his death sentence, remains perpetually on the stage while you're at intermission. And I think is that is a very clear message being sent there, which is that while you're getting a drink, the sort of peril and harrowing nature of being that person in history remains alive and present. Were there anywhere, or any ways in which, when you were crafting the narrative, that you sought to imbue the reader with any sense of emotional reaction to the character? Did you utilize any techniques or anything like that to give that perception?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and there's a handful of techniques employed throughout the narrative. Basically, Mallory's she has a series of repeated phrases
Yes.
that she employs throughout the narrative. And when she delivers those, even though it's the same phrase, the same 4 or 5 words, provided the context, you're supposed to conceivably take away something different, whether it be sarcastic, whether you find it sincere. So
Hmm.
there's a number of guideposts that serve to sort of walk you through. I mean, what you put forth with leaving the character, I mean, that's precisely sort of the heart of what I was getting at. Like, while you're getting up to go get yourself a snack or crack open another beer, that person is still in that particular predicament. So the idea is never to let them forget. But it's primarily through the fragmented nature of her recounting the story, looping back to points that she finds are significant, that are raised by the other ancillary characters in the novel, chiefly her parents to a degree, and the producers who pepper her with questions and her
Yeah.
reactions to those.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to go about that. I noticed she you're the way you write Mallory, she lingers on trying to achieve precision with her language. She doesn't want to be misunderstood, and it gives the character a voice which is seems to have a measure of innocence while also being very desirous to communicate her feelings and engage with you. It feels like a real conversation, and that it is important to her, the character on the page, which I thought was really interesting and very effective in that way.
Well, thanks. Yeah, part of the pure fun and one of the greatest challenges is that, again, the point when she's abducted through her eventual escape, she has no formal education,
Yeah.
and her captor really refuses to speak with her. So the writing is really a reflection of how she learned to speak, which was primarily to herself and to nature. And it was difficult to capture that. So there's definitely a degree of innocence because, again, of a lack of experience, which again is sort of ironic because she's got so much experience that
Hmm.
thankfully nobody will ever endure. So the tricky part was balancing, again, her syntax, diction, and style in a way that was palatable to hopefully most readers. Um, Yet at the word I would use that was most important to me is sincere. That was
Yeah.
true to her, and that comes across as something she would say. so that there's
Yeah.
not a line on page 124 that sounds different from something that's on page 14, because there is no growth from the time she sits down to write to the time you get to the novel's conclusion.
Hmm.
She has not evolved as a writer, definitely as a thinker, but she hasn't all overnight become this wonderful person who can sit and craft these beautiful sentences. So it was more about
Yeah.
capturing beautiful ideas and rendering them through the mind of somebody with huge achievement gaps.
Yeah. So you are a dad. You told me you have twins. Was it
Yes.
difficult to write about this topic while having children, and or did it feel almost sort of important from the perspective of communicating that element of innocence and the sort of um, that nature of children as they exist and as they communicate?
The latter, extremely important. If the book's dedicated to my wife,
Hmm.
my best friend, but the book was primarily written for my kids, because again, I do think it's such an important topic, and I want them to grow up to make their own decisions. But
Hmm.
as we see where our culture is headed and where media is headed, to be consciously aware of what it is they're consuming, why it is they're consuming, how much of what they're watching is influencing the way that they think. And of anything I've written to date, and potentially going forward, if they do pick up anything that I publish and they're not old enough now, it's the book that I would have written for them.
I think that's interesting because I too try and communicate sort of complex ideas that I struggle with as a parent thinking about communicating, right? Uh, Ideas around society, ideas around television shows, ideas around history and family, and it obviously we're that's the dad lit pod, so
Right.
a lot of it is things that I, as a dad to a 4-year old, I can't have that conversation with my daughter now. And I don't know if I'll ever get the chance later, right?
Right.
One hopes,
Yep.
but you almost, I think, um, want to leave that as a vision of value, if that makes sense. That that when I write, I'm very aware that one day my daughter will read it, and from it she will intuit her father's values, um, and the philosophy that I had, even if I'm not there. And I think that's challenging and probably one of the great arbiters.
Mhm.
Right.
Yep.
It discourages me from, writing, smut and splatter punk and all those other things. Not that I'd be particularly desirous of writing those things, but that one day my daughter might be interested in what her father thought about a thing. Uh, uh, Always weighs on my mind. It sounds like it's the same for you.
Yeah, no question. And to even to add on to that a little bit, given my twins are a little bit younger, I do work with high school students who are old enough
Hmm.
to pick up the book and read it, as high school seniors. And it was definitely at the forefront of my mind. What would they take it was more, but it was more though of like inspiration, as opposed to reticent to put anything down, um
Hmm.
given the fact, like you mentioned at the beginning, who I am, how old I am, etc. I wanted to make sure I was completely respectful um, to like own stories and things of that nature, and squarely focus the narrative primarily on the idea of what it is people are consuming and why.
Mhm.
So obviously it's a bit of a leap, and I'm not saccharine or overly sentimental, but I do, very much think of my students while working with them at, like sort of like kids of my own that are part of my family while they're in my classroom. And
Mhm.
even more so than my own kids who I hope to will pick up the book at some point in time. I'm very much curious what they would say a few years down the road when they're in college.
Yeah. What is so you're teaching high school students or secondary
Correct.
students?
Yeah.
Yeah, what courses are you teaching? And if it's literature, what books are you using?
No, I teach at a very small school. It's one of the things that I like to share the most. I think we had a graduating class of 12 or 14 students,
Oh,
but
that's
it's
pretty small.
very small. It's a very special place to work. And we have a lot of academic freedom as a
Hmm.
result of that. So, just two highlights from last year: Cormac McCarthy's The Road and Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams. Had a lot of fun working with that. More on the more challenging side, Faulkner's As I Lay Dying.
Hmm.
Books that are wildly successful, because I do teach a wider grade range. S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders. I've yet to meet a student who hasn't fallen in love with that
Hmm.
particular book, my own kids included.
Yeah,
Uh,
stay gold, pony boy.
yeah, exactly. My daughter's got a stay gold shirt, but there's just something that Hinton was able to capture that just still resonates with kids today, and not in like a corny or ironic way that a
Hmm.
lot of us that have grown up like to have fun with it. But yeah, I'm trying to going into this year. I think the first book um, that's up is We've Always Lived in the Castle, Shirley Jackson's macabre story, which I'm excited about and isn't really often taught. Like things like The Lottery are, and some of her shorter fiction.
Yeah.
And um, there's one other title because we're sort of rolling out a new curriculum. There's new New York State standards that we're aligning things to. But if we wanted to talk nonfiction and sort of get back on topic a little bit, I teach Elie Wiesel's Night every year, which
Hmm.
is a revelatory experience throughout the course of the unit.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting. What do you find that the students that come up through are prepared for challenging literary works?
If we're from an idea standpoint or from a sentence level syntactical standpoint,
I would say comprehension, reading and comprehension.
as we move further and further through the 2020s, like classics like Dickens,
Yeah.
and again, even going back to Faulkner, reads like a different sort of English.
Mm.
Even To Kill a Mockingbird, um, students often just discuss the nature of the writing compared to a lot of what they would prefer to pick from the shelves. So
Hmm.
definitely capable of comprehension. It requires a little bit more work.
Yeah, there's effort that goes into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching my daughter now learning to read. I was reminded that it's actually hard
Yeah.
uh, until you develop that muscle and you develop that comprehension. It feels like work to understand or to put together sentences. It's sort of interesting that reading and even writing are just things that get better with practice when you just practice it.
Yep.
It's a fascinating concept.
It truly is. And from an ideas standpoint, that's the joy of teaching is what I mean. I may have read The Road 20 times, and somebody invariably will come up with some idea, concept, or notion that I had not explored before.
Hmm.
So it's just, and again, you're talking, Faulkner and McCarthy. That's pretty tough stuff.
Hmm.
But like a Dickens, again, like the older form of English, and then well, I'm misspeaking, the Victorian literature as it's presented to a 21st century audience just seems like a different form of English. Um,
Yeah, it
but
almost takes longer to read.
yeah, oh,
It
for
just
sure.
feels longer to read,
Yep.
right?
And again, he got paid by the word, so he wasn't scared to put
That's the
down as
other
many
thing.
words as possible. But if we took something, something analogous that's equally arduous, um, there was another great story I had in mind. But yeah, so it is, yeah, it does seem longer. Um, but again, the sentence is, just more compound, complex sentences, different sentence structure, more heightened
Hmm.
diction. It's just a different time.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's interesting. I think what's her name? Uh Jonathan Norrell in Mr. Strange,
Yeah.
that she sort of uh resuscitated it
Yep.
for her incredibly long and yet wonderful book, fantasy book about English fantasy in the Napoleonic War period. But it's interesting when you sit down with something like that and then you step out of it and realize how far and how much the reader is left to determine what is going on.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because now I remembered Tolkien with The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So many of my students love to engage those narratives, and primarily, cinematic at first. Then we
Hmm.
get that back into the text, and then you take something like The Hobbit, and they see it or perceive it as high fantasy, low fantasy, whatever the case may be. But you just really talk about, well, how does the story begin? It starts with a birthday party. You guys know what a birthday party is. You've had a birthday before. What's your favorite birthday? Think about it, root the individual in the familiar, and the most fantastical then becomes a lot more digestible. Sort of forget about the difficulty that's on the page, and you let the
Yeah,
story carry you away.
yeah,
Which is much different than something like Gaddis's JR, where he doesn't care if you even comprehend the word on the page. He just wants you to read as fast as you possibly can because that's the project that he undertook. So, as a teacher, it took me a long time to try to find that nice balance between what's going to really work well in the classroom and set students up to become lifelong readers. And
yeah.
you gave a great example, and that's actually one that I'm going to jot down and see if I can get a small class selection of. I forgot about that one, but yeah, it's cool how that was done to then sort of not so much reinvent the genre, but bring people back into the genre, which then opens up different doorways.
Yeah, it's intriguing. I'm thinking about um, doing a sort of turn of the century historical novel set in the during the Spanish American War, and every time I sit down with it, I think, oh man, how much do I want to expand my style to tell this story, and what really do I need to be doing to make that happen? And it's very challenging. It's very challenging to think and to write intentionally in that way, which is why Susan Collins, is it Suzanne Collins? I forget her name, but the Jonathan Norland, Mr. Strange author. I think that was such a spectacular book because of the way that she was just sort of able to create that and create that illusion and sort of set you into the place with the language of the time itself.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Michael Faber, The Crimson Petal and the White.
Hmm.
Similar, but again, for a little bit more of a older audience. But yeah, going back and revisiting that historical time period, it really just a really cool project. And it's remarkable how writers like that are able to achieve that unity effect that they're so clearly aiming for while telling an incredibly good story.
Yeah, very. So, would you like to plug your book again? Tell us where we can get it and when it's coming out.
Yeah, thanks. So it's Dry the Rain from Picketfire Press. We had a pre-sale going. I think the pre-sale sold out. But if people go
Hey,
to,
great.
yeah,
That's good.
um, the reviews have been favorable so far. Picked up a small award pre-pub so far.
Oh, what'd you
If
get?
they go to, um, I'd have to ask John. Something from Literary Titan.
Hmm.
Um, some star. It's been kind of a whirlwind the past week. Um,
Hmm.
but it's all out there at picketfire.com. Information about that as well. But that helped propel and get some new readers and reviews coming in. But there's definitely some, I believe, some paperback available. Picketfire.com/shop, I think. And
Hmm.
then I believe October 14th, the book will be released where books are sold. Distribution is, something that we're still working on now, but definitely anywhere digitally, and then all over this particular region and some other spots as well as we continue to branch out.
Yeah. Well, I can say from my personal experience as a person who's read it, it's a very affecting and I think for me as a parent, it's sort of emotionally challenging in terms of a read, but a wonderfully written book and certainly worthy of all the praise that you seem to be getting. And obviously, looking forward to seeing other stuff from you, Richard.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do have something lined up, as you mentioned at the beginning, for 2027, which is a little bit different, and have most of the next novel written. So, yeah, hopefully a lot more to come.
You're a machine.
Yeah, just
Pumping it out.
discipline. Just takes a lot of discipline, and again, being
Yes.
a teacher, helps quite a bit. Teaching creative writing and all that.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Richard Leise, for joining us. Go out and get your copy of Dry the Rain from Picketfire Press. See, I got it right this time, right?
That's right. But
Yes,
also
try
pick up
to.
a copy.
Yeah,
Get
yeah. Also pick
get
up a
Duffy's
copy.
book as well.
Yes, of John's book, Where When It Rains,
Yeah.
which John has also been on the podcast, and we did
Oh,
a book report or a book club
okay.
episode with John, and then John and I recently did another book club episode for Alice or the Wild Girl. All terrific books written by dads and in the literary realm, written by contemporary male authors.
Yeah, I'm
So,
looking forward to Alice. I've gotten to know the author a little bit
mm,
through social.
it's very
So
good.
yeah,
It's
I
very good
can't
as
wait.
well. So, well, anyway, thank you, Richard, and I will be sure to pick up at least whatever John has left after this blitz of
Sounds
sales.
good. Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on.
All right, take care.
Our time together has come to an end. It's time to return to your wife, kids, and friends. It's time to pick up those books you forgot while you wait for the next ad lit